Περιμέναμε καιρό τώρα και ετοιμαζόμασταν. Αμφισβητήσαμε το παλιό. Δοκιμάσαμε νέους τρόπους. Ανακαλύψαμε δυνάμεις που έχουμε μέσα μας. Αυτή είναι η στιγμή να κάνουμε το άλμα. Όχι μικρά βήματα με δισταγμό. Εκθετική και βιώσιμη ανάπτυξη. Νέες επενδύσεις και νέες θέσεις εργασίας. Για όλους. Στην Αλφα Bank είμαστε έτοιμοι. Όπως και εσείς. Έτοιμοι για το αύριο.
Ξεκινάμε. Για να μπορείς να πηγαίνεις ακόμα πιο γρήγορα.
Να ζεις περισσότερα. Να κρατάνε περισσότερο αυτά που μετράνε.
Να μπορείς να αλλάξεις ότι θα έμενε πάντα ίδιο.
Γι' αυτό η δύναμη της οπτικής ίνας πρέπει να βρίσκεται όπου είσαι κι εσύ.
Από τη μία άκρη της Ελλάδας, εγώ στην άλλη.
Η φαντασία σου να είναι ελεύθερη, να ταξιδεύει παντού.
Οι ακόμα πιο γρήγορες ταχύτητες μας πηγαίνουν όλους ακόμα πιο μπροστά.
Αυτό πιστεύουμε στην Κοσμοτέ. Γι' αυτό αναβαθμίζουμε τη χώρα επεκτείνοντας το δίκτυο Κοσμοτέ Fiber. Μέχρι το τέλος του έτους φέρνουμε την οπτική ίνα σε 1 εκατομμύριο σπίτια και επιχειρήσεις. Και ως το τέλος του 2027 στα 2 τρίτα της Ελλάδας. Γιατί ένας κόσμος πιο γρήγορος για όλους είναι ένας κόσμος καλύτερος για όλους.
Ξεκινήσαμε και μέχρι να φέρουμε την οπτική ίνα και σε σένα, αναβαθμίζουμε από τώρα την ταχύτητα του ίντερνετ εντελώς δωρεάν. Για να πηγαίνεις κι εσύ ακόμα πιο γρήγορα.
Υπάρχουν επώνυμα φάρμακα που φροντίζουν την υγεία εκατομμυρίων ανθρώπων στην Ελλάδα και σε όλο τον κόσμο. Φάρμακα που είναι η λύση για τους ασθενείς, για το σύστημα υγείας, για ολόκληρη τη χώρα. Υπάρχουν επώνυμα φάρμακα ασφαλή και προσιτά που παράγονται με τα υψηλότερα πρότυπα ποιότητας και είναι αποτέλεσμα διαρκούς έρευνας και καινοτομίας. Αυτά είναι τα φάρμακα που αξίζει να στηρίξουμε γιατί μπορούν να προσφέρουν ένα καλύτερο μέλλον για όλους. Αυτά είναι τα ελληνικά φάρμακα. Ελληνικό φάρμακο. Η λύση για την υγεία, την κοινωνία, την ανάπτυξη.
Εξοχοτάτη κυρία Πρόεδρε της Ελληνικής Δημοκρατίας, αξιότιμε κύριε Πρωθυπουργέ, αξιότιμε Πρόεδρε του Συνδέσμου Ελληνικών Βιομηχανιών, αγαπητά μέλη του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου και εκπροσώπους όλων των μελών του Συνδέσμου, κυρίες και κύριοι, σας καλωσορίζω λοιπόν στο ανοιχτό σκέλος της ετήσιας Γενικής Συνέλευσης του Συνδέσμου Ελληνικών Βιομηχανιών. Είμαι η Ιωάννα Παπαδοπούλου. Είναι πολύ μεγάλη τιμή σήμερα που ανέλαβα την Προεδρία της Γενικής Συνέλευσης του Συνδέσμου. Θα ήθελα λοιπόν από καρδιάς να ευχαριστήσω και τον Πρόεδρο και το Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο. Θα ήθελα επίσης να ευχαριστήσω όλους εσάς, επιχειρηματίες και στελέχη των πιο σημαντικών επιχειρήσεων και φορέων της χώρας μας, για την παρουσία σας σήμερα εδώ. Προ λίγων ωρών, σε αυτό το χώρο, ολοκληρώσαμε τις αρχαιρεσίες της φετινής εκλογικής Γενικής Συνέλευσης του Συνδέσμου μας. Η Γενική μας Συνέλευση εξέλεξε το νέο Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του Συνδέσμου μας, επανεκλέγοντας στη θέση του Προέδρου τον Δημήτρη Παπαλεξόπουλο, ενώ και πάλι Πρόεδρος της Εκτελεστικής Επιτροπής θα είναι ο Ευθύμιος Βιδάλης. Αναδείξαμε επίσης το νέο μας 90 μελές Γενικό Συμβούλιο και πλέον στα όργανα του Συνδέσμου μας είναι αυξημένος ο αριθμός των γυναικών, ενώ εκπροσωπούνται πολλές νέες επιχειρήσεις από όλους τους κλάδους της οικονομίας μας, συμπεριλαμβανομένου και του οικοσυστήματος καινοτομίας. Θερμά συγχαρητήρια λοιπόν και καλή επιτυχία στον Πρόεδρό μας, τον κύριο Δημήτρη Παπαλεξόπουλο, στον Πρόεδρο της Εκτελεστικής Επιτροπής, τον κύριο Βιδάλη, στα μέλη του Διοικητικού μας Συμβουλίου και στα νέα μέλη του Γενικού μας Συμβουλίου. Είμαι βεβαία ότι κατά την επόμενη διετία ο Σύνδεσμος, όπως κάνει εδώ και 115 χρόνια, όχι μόνο θα εκπροσωπήσει επάξια τις σύγχρονες και οργανωμένες επιχειρήσεις της χώρας μας, αλλά θα μας δείξει το δρόμο της προσαρμογής στους καιρούς που ειδικά σήμερα είναι διαρκώς μεταβαλλόμενοι και απρόβλεπτοι τόσο στη χώρα μας όσο και διεθνώς. Και αυτός ο ρόλος του Συνδέσμου έχει ιδιαίτερη αξία στις μέρες μας, μια που η κρίση που ζούμε, όχι μόνο στις επιχειρήσεις, αλλά σε ολόκληρη την κοινωνία, ήρθε τη στιγμή που η Ελλάδα συνερχόταν από το διπλό σοκ της κρίσης του χρέους και της υγειονομικής κρίσης του κορονοϊού. Για όλους μας το ερώτημα είναι πώς μπορούμε να βοηθήσουμε ώστε να συνεχίσουμε να στηρίζουμε τη χώρα μας, την οικονομία της και τους ανθρώπους της. Χρειαζόμαστε επενδύσεις στους ανθρώπους μας, αλλά και μια αποτελεσματική και γρήγορη επενδυτική στρατηγική για την πράσινη μετάβαση, τον ψηφιακό μετασχηματισμό, ώστε οι επιχειρήσεις μας να παραμείνουν και να γίνουν ακόμα περισσότερο ανταγωνιστικές. Χρειάζεται να δουλέψουμε όλοι μαζί για μια σειρά από μεταρρυθμίσεις στο κράτος, αλλά και στις ίδιες τις επιχειρήσεις μας, ώστε να θωρακίσουμε την εθνική μας οικονομία και φυσικά τις θέσεις εργασίας, δίνοντας ιδιαίτερη έμφαση στη νέα γενιά. Είναι ένας δρόμος που η Ελλάδα τον διανύει τα τελευταία χρόνια και η παρούσα κρίση δεν πρέπει να λειτουργήσει ανασταλτικά στην κοινή μας προσπάθεια για μια ανταγωνιστική και εξωστρεφή οικονομία, που είναι η βασική προϋπόθεση για την πρόοδο ολόκληρης της κοινωνίας μας. Η απόψινή συζήτηση μεταξύ του Πρωθυπουργού και του Προέδρου του Συνδέσμου είμαι σίγουρη πως θα φωτίσει πολλές από αυτές τις πτυχές. Πριν σας ευχαριστήσω και καλέσω στο βήμα τον δημοσιογράφο κ. Παύλο Τσίμα, που θα είναι και ο συντονιστής της σημερινής εκδήλωσης, θα ήθελα να κάνω μια ιδιαίτερη αναφορά σε ένα πρόσωπο που χάσαμε πρόσφατα, πολύ πρόωρα, όχι μόνο εμείς του Συνδέσμου, αλλά ως χώρα και ως κοινωνία συνολικά. Μιλώ για τον πρώην πρόεδρο του Συνδέσμου μας, τον κύριο Οδυσσέα Kyriakopoulo, ο οποίος ήταν ένας σπουδαίος φίλος, ένας εξέχων επιχειρηματίας μεγάλης εμβάλειας, ένας σπουδαίος οικογενειάρχης, ένας εξαίρετος άνθρωπος, τον οποίον πάντα θα θυμόμαστε. Κύριε Τσίμα, σας καλωσορίζω και σας καλώ στο βήμα για να αναλάβετε τη συνέχεια. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, κυρία Παπαδοπούλου. Αισθάνομαι μεγάλη τιμή και θέλω να ευχαριστήσω και εσάς και το Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του Συνδέσμου που μου ανέθεσε αυτόν τον τιμητικό ρόλο, τον οποίο υπόσχομαι ότι θα ασκήσω με αυτοσυγκράτηση και φιδό. Άλλωστε, δεν ήρθα για να θέσω ερωτήσεις. Οι ερωτήσεις είναι στο μυαλό μας. Ήρθα για να ακούσω τις απαντήσεις. Ήρθα και στα αυτιά μου και στα αυτιά σας, φαντάζομαι, βουίζουν διαρκώς σκοτεινές και δυσίωνες προφητείες και προβλέψεις. Θα μπορούσα να πω δεκάδες. Δεν θυμάμαι πρόχειρα την πρόσφατη σχετικά δήλωση του Διευθύνοντος Συμβούλου της JP Morgan ότι έρχεται οικονομικός τυφώνας.
From the US, we heard that this is a storm that will be with us for years to come, i.e. the high energy prices. And I remember when the pandemic broke out, there was an IMF survey which was warning countries and enterprises that the history of pandemics from the 13th century onwards shows that pandemics are followed by war, civil war, strife, turmoil, and if the states and enterprises do not work with foresight, we will see history repeating itself. I can mention such doom and gloom prophecies galore, but I come here with my palm extended and I want to listen to the discussion. I don't only want a good stock-taking exercise of risks and opportunities, but some cautious optimism. What we will listen to tonight, and this is the first time this is happening in an AGM of SEV, will be a dialogue, an open dialogue, a free dialogue. And I will try to structure it as best I can between Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister, and the re-elected President of SEV, Mr. Papalexopoulos. Now, regarding the agenda of this dialogue, I would like you to watch what people from the entrepreneurial world have to say, and you'll watch this short video. Thank you.
Μετά την πανδημία βλέπουμε το σπάσιμο της παγκόσμιας εφοδιαστικής αλυσίδας, κενά στην παραγωγή σε χώρες όπως η Κίνα, αυξημένη ζήτηση στις κοινωνίες μας, συνολική άνοδο των τιμών σε ενέργεια, τρόφιμα, προϊόντα που εξαρτώνται από Ρωσία και Ουκρανία, στάσιμο πληθωρισμό και ενεργειακή κρίση που θυμίζουν δεκαετία του 70, αλλά με ένα μεγάλο πόλεμο και με το φάσμα επιστηστικής κρίσης.
Η μεγάλη τάση η οποία κυριαρχεί στην παγκόσμια οικονομία τώρα, αλλά ήδη και από την προηγούμενη κρίση αμέσως πριν της πανδημίας, είναι η αβεβαιότητα. Αυτό επηρεάζει τους πάντες, τους πολίτες, ως καταναλωτές, τις επιχειρήσεις, επηρεάζει τι προσδοκίες έχουμε για το μέλλον, αλλά αλλάζει και κανόνες. Και αυτή η αλλαγή των κανόνων, για μια χώρα σαν τη δικιά μας, η οποία κουβαλάει πληγές ήδη από την προηγούμενη κρίση του χρέους, προκαλεί νέα προβλήματα, αλλά από την άλλη εμφανίζονται και σημαντικές νέες ευκαιρίες, καθώς αλλάζει η παγκόσμια οικονομία. Και μπορούμε να βρούμε εκεί περιοχές που να αναπτύξουμε νέα συγκριτικά πλεονεκτήματα.
Σε αυτούς τους δύσκολους καιρούς είναι ξεκάθαρο ότι οι απολαβές των εργαζομένων καλώς αυξήθηκαν και πρέπει να αυξηθούν κι άλλο. Αυτό που χρειάζονται όμως οι επιχειρήσεις για να μπορέσουν να ανταποκριθούν σε αυτή την πρόκληση είναι τη βοήθεια της πολιτείας. Ας μην ξεχνάμε ότι ακόμα και σήμερα, μετά από αρκετές αξιόλογες μειώσεις των ασφαλιστικών εισφορών, για κάθε 1.000 ευρώ που παίρνει ο εργαζόμενος, η επιχείρηση επιβαρύνεται με ένα πρόσθετο κόστος Είναι κρίσιμο λοιπόν η πολιτεία να μειώσει αυτό το κόστος για την επιχείρηση, ώστε να μπορέσει και αυτή να συνεχίσει να στηρίζει τον εργαζόμενο.
Greek banks were able, with hard work, to overcome the problems from the crisis. They don't have big problems anymore with liquidity and NPLs. This new dynamic had to do with the credit they provided to their clientele during the pandemic. But we've entered into a new period of uncertainty because structural changes in the energy sector have caused inflationary pressure. The increase in energy prices has affected retail. So the price of oil, the price of electricity, price of oil affecting transportation cost, all this has led to additional cost. And up until now, at least all enterprises have had to fully bear the cost. In our enterprise, the cost of energy has increased by 288%. So what is now at stake is the sustainability of our sector. We conclude deals based on quantities of raw materials in constantly changing prices, and they go up from 50 to 120%. So what we need is incentives and policies to support manufacturing in the primary sector. What is also very important is for us to help prop up the primary sector. This has to do with the EU strategy from farm to plate. So incentives have to be provided for use of alternative energy resources. So we want to invest in renewable energy sources, but we wait for the development law to be adopted and to have a good network. So we also have increasing need for working capital, and we need help from the state and the banking sector in order for the enterprises to work seamlessly. The good thing about Greece at this juncture is that we are no longer at the center. I would say that Greece has every reason to be optimistic that it will be able to have performance better than the EU average. As a banking sector, we want to provide loans for green transition and for renewable energy sources. And we support a lot of enterprises that help Greece become more dynamic. So there's an opportunity for us to steer course in relation to the economy, and we want not only to converge, but to be able to be above the EU average. This can be done based on new technologies and innovation in the manufacturing sector, but it can also be done elsewhere in other sectors where we have competitive advantages. In an economy which changes rapidly worldwide, we can find a new position in order for us to have better income for the Greek population. But we have to look at the overall picture, the big picture. The big picture is that Greece can quickly reach the EU average and even be better than that in the euro area. We can sell to new markets, we can attract new investments, and we can attract human capital, employees that is, who may have studied, who may have experience from working in the field. So this is an opportunity. Why does this opportunity exist? Because we are seeing new things happening. The deck of cards is being reshuffled. And now that the rules are changing, I think we can position ourselves differently. So the RRF is a very important tool in this effort. And this was made very quickly and in a quality manner by the Greek state. So the banks are here to support the RRF so we can save on the cost for our clients. The role of the state is a critical one. It's a pivotal one. It must stay on its course. It must continue the reform agenda and upgrade infrastructure so that Greece can be able to attract more investment, meaning at a higher pace. So what you saw And we also see some other video clips. This is the short version of all the views that were expressed. Everything will be uploaded on the website of SEV as of tomorrow, so you can watch them and you can hear all the views and not just this abridged version. So I just want to mention what Mr. Veta said, who was cautiously optimistic. I was begging for this cautious optimism, and I'd like to ask Mr. Alexopoulos to come forward. So congratulations on being re-elected, and please come forward. Please join me on stage. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, President of the Republic, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you in turn in the General Assembly of SEV. After 2 years that the pandemic had in fact set the limits, I'm very pleased to be here together with you tonight, even though I think that we're a bit more crowded than we'd like in these times that are still quite dangerous. So it will be a great pleasure to speak with the Prime Minister about how difficult things are today, but also with respect to a better tomorrow, in which we believe, Mr. Tsipras. After 12 difficult years, disappointments, anger, and hopes that did not come to fruition, but also with respect to our persistence and our patience, reservoirs of which we didn't know we had to that extent, we are going to strive ahead together in order to conquer our dreams. But instead of that, after 2 years of pandemic, we find ourselves in an acute crisis, in an environment with the great uncertainties, both geopolitical and economic in nature. It is small solace that now the causes of the crisis, as well as the pandemic, are in fact extrinsic. That they started in the geopolitical humanitarian crisis of the Ukraine, and the fallout of the crisis do not really touch Greece first. But the impact on the Greek economy are visible, or is visible already. We've seen that the cost of energy has shot up. We saw this in the video. But this is also true for the cost of the food and the raw materials. This impacts on the businesses and reduces the available income, especially of the weakest. The problems in the supply chain have affected adversely many Greek businesses. The competitiveness of the Greek, and especially the European production, is in fact subsiding. The investment prospects are under threat, whilst the fiscal resilience is put to the test again. Addressing the direct and immediate risks is, of course, the first priority of the state, businesses, and the institutional bodies such as SEV. It makes sense. But this exercise should not limit itself to how we are going to curb the fallout from the crisis. This would be a lost opportunity for Greece. And I attach importance to what Mr. Veta said here. Conversely, in SEV, we believe in the need to have the simultaneous rollout of a reform and developmental agenda, because the crisis does not come to an end, or does not bring to an end. It might expedite all of these great changes, and we must all engage in overcoming them, because the rich resources that we have from the EU are in fact the impetus for a frog leap in order to go above and beyond the institutional weaknesses that we have felt the brunt of for years. We need a more effective government and more effective businesses, because we see that the pension issues is in fact like a time bomb, and the emphasis on how we can increase the pie could in fact give us the possibility to believe in a better tomorrow, give us more self-confidence, a self-confidence that's been greatly afflicted in recent times. I think society is more open to such an agenda, ready to embrace it, more so than it had in the past, at least. In the economy also, despite the difficulties, we see many of the preconditions existing to have a cycle for sustained growth and for social prosperity. A lot of the main indicators are decisively moving in the right direction. I have heard you also, Prime Minister, talk about the course of the GDP. The outlook is good. It's better than EU for the reduction of unemployment, for the resilience of the economy, especially industry in the pandemic, and also exports and investments. And I'd like to dwell on the last, because it is in investments that our future lies. They went from 10% of the GDP, where they had remained there for about a decade, to 14%. They jumped 4 percentage points. And although we have a lot to do in order to reach 20% that experts believe we need, besides these key indicators, we have also other indicators that are not so promoted, which show that we have, in fact, a vital ecosystem of startups, that from an almost zero capitalization a few years ago, they were the children of the crisis, as Michael Varemis has called them, have reached 8 billion in capitalization and gives 7,000 jobs, which are, in fact, very good, solid jobs in the realm of innovation. And at last, we see the rapprochement between the businesses and academia. We see tangible proof that the acceleration of the digitalization of public service and of the various digital realm has in fact moved ahead. Greece is, in fact, stronger. It is more trustworthy and more mature than it was 10 years ago, and it is ready to face the crisis. We have to admit that the progress that has taken place until now is not by chance. Let us remember the positive elements. The taxation framework has improved in terms of its stability and effectiveness, even though the tax brackets are high for the organized businesses and their employees. A lot of interventions have taken place in order to rationalize bureaucracy and red tape. The banking system has, in fact, been strengthened, and it is giving a blood supply to the Greek economy. And we see that the total framework for tackling climate change and energy transition has, in fact, been established according to the European guidelines. We have landmark investments, both Greek and foreign, and they have multiplying effects. And Prime Minister, I know that a lot of them bear your stamp. So the state, albeit hesitantly, is facing businesses as a solution and not as an enemy. And in tackling the pandemic and this crisis, the government, above and beyond the priority of protecting the society and the weaker, has in fact given resources in order to stem the problems from the pandemic, which were quite destructive. But we see that there has been an increase of investment, and with the assumption of risk, with greater extroversion, with the gradual ESG principles adoption, with innovation, with the creation of new well-paid jobs. The businesses have, to a great extent, limited to the greatest extent the extra cost, limited the extra cost shifted to the consumer, given the large increase in the prices and costs generally. So Progress has been made to a great extent, both by the state and by the businesses. Is comparing to the past the correct yardstick? Or in practice, are we actually measuring ourselves up to other, or with other more difficult demons that have, in fact, been pervasively there? And what about the green tradition? Are we gaining ground or losing ground compared to other countries within and without Europe? Because they're also moving ahead. They're not remaining at a standstill. Do we have the mechanisms in order to implement what we've legislated and a sufficient number of competitive businesses in order to be able to bring these to market? In these questions, we cannot answer, or to these questions we cannot answer positively, without hesitation at least. So that means that we have to take advantage of the opportunity that we have, and which has been, in fact, talked about by Mr. Vedas. Well, in order to do that, we need to have, in fact, higher yardstick. We have to set the bar higher for both state and for businesses, especially when the performance is in fact sorely lagging and it is not up to the task at hand. And I think that this discussion is going to be more useful than perhaps pleasant, because we're going to note certain of these sectors. Now, the employer contributions remain high, and this limits the employees' income and the competitiveness of those law-abiding companies. The improvement of regulation, the simplification of legislation, the implementation of law in practice, and the speed of awarding justice remain a huge wager for the rule of law. Now, the multiplicity of laws and the fact that justice is awarded slowly is perhaps the greatest impediment to investments. It is also a source of lack of transparency and lack of confidence. A member of our board today talked about a court case that was brought to a close 22 years later. What investment plan can remain there for 22 years before it can actually be implemented? We see this great red tape and the overregulation of each detail still exist. And even though we have, in fact, made leaps and bounds of progress in terms of digitalization and the provision of digital services to businesses, we still are doing poorly compared to other EU countries. We are in the EU average with 1,400 electronic public services, but they cover 97% of the total procedures. In Greece, only 50%, 54% to be exact. In the effort to attract and realize investments, all of these things are, in fact, a counter-incentive, and a strong one for that matter. The same holds true for licensing. We see that we have done a lot of groundwork with a historic attempt to simplify and to provide a foreseeable licensing of productive businesses. But even now, we're far from achieving what we want. In Greece, less than 24% of the surface area has, in fact, well-determined land usage. And even though there is the government plan for the land usage, this is, in fact, still missing. It would be a shame not to use the RRF in order to ensure the security of law or the certainty of law for investments. Management of waste and the adoption of the principles of the circular economy are things that we lag in. There is, in fact, a key pending point, and this has to do with the interventions and the investments that are needed in order to have an energy market that operates effectively. Europe rather will have, in fact, a competitive drawback for 4 years unless something unforeseen happens. The green transition also will add to the complexity and will incur a higher cost for years to come. During this critical transitional period, which will last a long time, there will be a lot of questions with respect to the competitiveness of European industry. At the very least, we have to make certain that the Greek businesses will not be at a disadvantage compared to the rest of Europe. And that is not the case so far. Correspondingly, an important European and Greek challenge is the legislating of rules that address the carbon leakage effectively. That means that production will take place outside of Europe, seeking more relaxed environmental rules, tackling the climate change, cost and supply of energy, and competitiveness product are three principles that pre-existed the crisis. But the crisis has, in fact, taken a turn for the worse and has made this more important. We have to have a state that can address these in the best possible manner. Even in a point that we all agree in, the fact that we need to accelerate the investments in renewable energy supply meets with a gap between the initiatives and the legislation implemented. In most countries, there is, in fact, a lot of interventions when it comes to licensing RES, but our problems make this even more difficult. And I think this is characteristic of a broader problem, in fact. Today, in our view, the problem of the country is no longer the lack of investment funds. As I mentioned before, Greece has become a more attractive destination for investments, both for domestic and for foreign investors. The risk today has to do with our possibility to be able to implement speedily due to the context of the operation of the market. And it's when they are speedily implemented, then they are meaningful. And we must not lag behind in implementing the critical reforms.
And if we're able to solve all the problems facing the country, will it be okay for enterprises? Are our enterprises ready to rise to the challenges of the modern world? I believe that an honest answer would be, just like the state, so we, the entrepreneurs in Greece, have a long way to go in order to be able to rise to the expectations. We need to invest a lot more in research, in innovation, and in digital transformation. A typical example is that under 10% of Greek enterprises make use of AI, whereas it's 40% in the other OECD countries. In SMEs, digital lagging behind is endemic. So we can and must invest more in our people. Trust in the younger people, using meritocracy to elect people, having lifelong learning for new skills to be acquired. This means that this should be done more regularly and it should be more widespread. So it is our obligation to multiply the opportunities for university graduates so that they can carry out their internship now that we have a more favorable framework. We want young people to come into touch with the real market. We want to open the doors wide for them so that they can see what it's like to work in a company. We want to deal effectively with youth unemployment. We want to combat it, and we also want to fill the real gap that we've underestimated because a lot of technical schools producing important skills. Well, we have a shortage of such technical schools, so we have a lot of professions that are not properly represented. And I think we have the opportunity to improve the ecosystem of startups. We want to develop synergies with traditional enterprises and universities. This will be mutually beneficial. In this way, we'll be able to be more innovative, but collectively, and we will also be able to create new high-value jobs. Corporate governance, there we have a long way to go, and I'm talking about not just doing things on paper, but actually applying everything in practice, and also embracing diversity, equality, and making a use of women in leadership positions. In other words, both the state and the enterprises can do more, and they can do things better, and we must rise to the occasion. We're asking the state prime minister to be more bold when it comes to carrying out reforms, and we demand of ourselves to be more bold, when it comes to modernization and to carry out reforms. So let me finish where I started. Our first thing is to handle the crisis and to protect the most vulnerable, those who are hit the hardest. But at the same time, as a country, we need to implement a specific reform agenda and developmental agenda. A lot has been done, and despite the negative circumstances, I think we have the best circumstances yet when it comes to be able to prosper. And we know that a lot of things are being contested, things that were traditional, and we have more multifaceted challenges than ever before. In order to address these challenges, we have to improve. We have to go up as a level. We have to be in the Super League as the state and as enterprises, and we need to exchange views. We need to work and forget the obsessions of the past without bias, because if we work together, this will give us a better chance to succeed. This will be good for society, and it will be good for all of us. This is why we decided to hold a discussion today, and we wanted to actually look at certain aspects of interest to society and the enterprises. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your presence here today, and we are waiting to hear from you so that we can have a meaningful discussion. I hope, Mr. Tsipras, that I've been able to pass the baton to you in this relay race. The question is whether this cautious optimism is romantic or whether it's well justified. Thank you very much. Well, you gave us food for thought, and I think that we would need more time for the discussion that will follow. So I give the floor without further ado to the Prime Minister of Greece. Thank you. So, could I have a first reaction, a quick reaction from you? First of all, let me congratulate Mr. Papaalexopoulos for his re-election as the president of SEV and for the excellent organization of the election procedure, which I envy. I love the discipline in which your elections are carried out. I think that the speech by Mr. Papaalexopoulos was a balanced one. It recognized the great progress that has been achieved in the country in the last 3 years, in particularly turbulent times. But what is of interest to me the most is not recognition of what we have achieved so far, but mapping the challenges that we will face from now onwards, and the pressing need need, which I keep trying to instill in people and in the members of my government, of my cabinet, that we have to pick up speed, we have to accelerate our pace because we're living in very difficult times. And as Mr. Papaalexopoulos said, we may be happy with our progress, but we don't work in a vacuum, and all other EU member states face similar problems, and they do not remain stagnant. They actually do a lot. They're very active, but we have quite a few competitive advantages vis-à-vis the other EU member states. Why? Because Greece is no longer considered a black sheep. It's not a peculiarity in Europe, an oddity. It is recognized by all that this 12-year cycle of great pain and suffering for the Greek society and Greek citizens is coming to a close officially with Greece's exit from the enhanced surveillance system in the month of August and improving our credit ranking. I think that this is something we can achieve in the first 6 months, the first half of 2023. So we have achieved a great deal. And I'd like to say this was by no means easy, and it was not self-evident either. What was required was hard work in order for us to make up for lost ground. Sometimes we had realized how far lagging behind we were and how quickly we needed to catch up. But I think that we were able to prove that if we plan our policies correctly, our public policies, we can really move forward in leaps and bounds. And I think that digitalization of the state is one such example, without this being considered the only reform success of this government. In conclusion, in order for me to close this introductory speech, and now that we are moving towards the last year of our tenure, of our term in office, we still have a long way to go. We still have to do a lot in order to call this 4-year period in government a success. And the question is, where do we want Greece to be in 2030? And the thing is, there are long-term policies that are being implemented, and the results are not immediately visible. So this is a discussion that is being held at the right time, and I'm really happy to see that SEV, even though we don't always see eye to eye when it comes to the various policies, SEV has been very honest, very bold. It can help us, and I think it can help us that we can be cautiously optimistic about the future, and I think that we will be successful in addressing the challenges that we have before us. You didn't discuss this, but this is something that we all keep talking about. So this is a 12-year cycle coming to an end, but here we have a new cycle of geopolitical instability and uncertainty in the world. And we heard about the war in Ukraine. It's not just another adventure next to a series of other adventures. So we see that we're changing the geopolitical era we live in. And how does this change your plan? Your plan in the long term, if you like, aspect, but also in relation to the entrepreneurs. So what has changed for the economy, to be specific? A lot has changed. I think you're experiencing this. We experience it on a daily basis. But let me point out that the pandemic was also something very different. This was a global pandemic. It was unprecedented, and no country was prepared to deal with it. But through the pandemic, let me say that a lot of opportunities arose, not just for Greece, but also for Europe as a whole. If it had not been for the pandemic, you must know that Europe would never had agreed on the loans that were financed by the RRF. And this allows us to have a lot of resources in order to be able to converge faster to other EU member states. So the pandemic brought about a change. There was a shift, if you like. And the war in Ukraine, this was something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And it's not just the loss of human life, casualties, the destruction in such a country which is being invaded by Russia. And we see this revisionist tactic by Russia where they're trying to use military force to rewrite history. These are things we can talk about later, but we also have the risk of global famine, because we know that Russia and Ukraine export a lot of raw materials used in the primary sector. So we are in an inflationary environment, the likes of which we haven't seen for 40 years, to be exact. We will actually be in an environment where there will be an increase in the interest rates in order for the inflationary pressures to be reduced. And this will have an impact on Greece as well, but also for the entrepreneurs, because we will all be called upon to take out loans with higher interest rates. But Greece, in relation to public finances and the structuring of its debt, despite the fact that we have the highest debt in the euro area, we are at an advantage compared to other southern European countries. Why? Because we don't have to pay off the debt as much as others do. Why? Because we were able to take out loans, and this means we have a buffer, we have a liquidity buffer. And why? Because the brand Greece has changed for the better. And this is something that is reflected in the money markets, in the capital markets, in the upgrading we have received from credit agencies. And this has been actually reflected in the economy, in the enterprises, and the facility in which the enterprises carry out investments, because we'll talk about investments and what the requirements are for investment. And there's another thing. It's very important for us to understand that this country is moving in the right direction. We have changes in licensing, we have changes in taxation, there's access to money markets. But if one doesn't believe that the country has overcome the problems and is moving in the right direction, nobody will undertake a credit risk. So the country risk, which used to exist in Greece, has gone down significantly. And this is something that in this difficult adventure we are experiencing, well, this makes us optimistic about the future, cautiously optimistic. What has changed in the way that an enterprise envisages itself and the future? So I think that those entrepreneurs who are still active, well, we have experienced a 40-year period of an economic stability with ups and downs. So this was a time when the economy was one of the most critical factors. And now, apart from the fact that we're still too early in the crisis in order to make forecasts, it is obvious that the geopolitical dimension, the social dimension, they acquire a different weight, if you like, in the economy of the country. And this means that these enterprises have to think differently, out of the box. And now they're more flexible than a state, or even a group of states like the EU. But they have a great challenge before them. They have to adjust because now there's a change that is taking place very quickly, and there's a lot of uncertainty. One thing is certain about countries and enterprises: the more things we have in order, the more we invest in knowledge, digital transformation, simplifying bureaucracy. This is only a good thing. Only good things can come out of it. If you actually run faster than others, you won't catch the lion, but at least you'll catch the others. So I think we have a competitive advantage. What I'm saying is that after a 10-year crisis, we are more resilient. The enterprises have become more resilient. They've restructured. And other companies who didn't face similar crises do not have the same reflexes, and they don't don't have the need, they didn't have the need to adjust so quickly. So I have a lot of faith in Greek enterprises. I believe in their possibilities. They have great potential. Why? Because they have shown that they were able to survive in a very difficult, painful crisis, a crisis which was long-standing, and I don't think that this crisis was observed in any other EU member state. So many enterprises have learned to deal with many-year crises, but the other side of the coin is that for 10 years we have not invested enough as companies, enough in equipment and HR. So our organization is rather weak, or we are weak as enterprises. And you said something in your speech. You said that we have to fill this gap in investments between Greece and other EU member states. When I came to talk to you in 2019 or 2018, I don't remember, but this was before I was elected Prime Minister, I had mentioned that one of the main objectives of the future government is to come closer to the EU average, and I'm talking about percentage of investments to the GDP. So we have improved, but we're not where we want to be yet. So productive investments are, in my opinion, the most important index of dynamic investments, and this is why we place great emphasis to investment activities and jobs, of course, that these investments create. So this is something that is of great concern to us as a government. So let's come to the current situation. You have a problem which makes me think that you're trying to square the circle. So we have seen what's happening in other countries. We see that the average income has to pay a lot of money. We see that the cost of living has skyrocketed. There's a lot of uncertainty. And this is reflected in one's family life and financial life. And on the other hand, you have enterprises which right now are in a turbulent sea with a lot of waves. We have price hikes, problems with the supply chain, cost of raw materials, which has gone up. So how can you do both? Meaning, how can you relieve those who are the weakest? How can you alleviate their suffering? And the IMF said, don't take cross-cutting measures, help the most vulnerable. But at the same time, how can you also help enterprises survive? How can you reduce the burden? How can you square this circle?
Well, it's not always good and useful to adopt what the International Monetary Fund actually recommends. But here we see there's also the recommendations of the Commission. And this is, in fact, what the government has followed throughout this period that it's given relief to the economy. During the pandemic, and you know this full well, great resources were, in fact, used in order to keep the productive fabric of the country alive and well. And we did this, in fact, and I think that this was the right approach. And the same is true now to reduce certain consumption taxes across the board would be something that would impact our public finances greatly, but I don't think it's the correct policy. Thankfully, we're able to use technology and the new platforms, and we are able to make these targeted interventions. Take the cost of energy, for example. In the beginning, we subsidized the low consumption of the households, but we saw afterwards that there was an astronomical impact on those households that had more than 300 kilowatt hours per month. A lot of them were poor because they paid for their energy poverty because they used bad quality heating elements in order to be able to be warm in the winter. So this is something that we couldn't ignore. So the platform will, in fact, be open for subsidies in order to return 60% of the excess spending from December to May. And this is also something that we've tried to do in targeting businesses. And through the intervention that we're going to make from the beginning of July, which will be more structural in the energy market, we're trying to be able to make the cost of energy foreseeable for households and businesses. Will it be higher than what we paid 2 years ago? Yes, I think that nobody can guarantee and ensure stable prices in terms of electricity and energy and natural gas, especially for the businesses that use them when we have such turmoil in the international energy markets. So we see that targeted interventions are needed, and they're also just socially fair. When it comes to fuel, we will have announcements next week. These are not going to be announcements that will intercede, at least for petrol, because diesel is something else, and it applies to the supply chain also. But when it comes to petrol, we won't have across-the-board tax cut. We will have a more targeted rationale here also. This does not reward across the board those who have the possibility today to foot these hikes. And I fully understand how much the budget of the households and the businesses are impacted by what is happening with the inflation, but there is still resilience there. The economy is still resilient. A lot of the money that was spent during the pandemic, whether it is capital which is being invested now by the businesses, or it is something that the households can use in order to defend themselves from the increase in the standard of living because of these inflationary hikes. I know that this was not the view of the association, but we have, in fact, increased quite generously, in fact, the minimum wage, because we believe that this dividend of growth has to be also allocated to the workers, and especially those who receive the least. And when we see how few reactions we had few before and even fewer after, I think that the businesses can absorb this increase in the minimum wage, which is also justified given the hikes in the cost of living. Mr. Papadakis, in order to get to the crux of the matter, is there an urgent need to support the weaker families that have less income and that are facing the changes that exist as if it's a nightmare? But can we actually bridge the two needs? There's no silver bullet, but as the IMF, SEV also has a reputation, and we see that its views never or not always match its reputation. But let's rephrase the issue. The European economy is, in fact, either between two ills, either to have an increase of the inflation or to avoid a recession. Now, I don't know how we're going to avoid this. Things are uncertain. We don't know how things will turn out. We don't, or we shouldn't have all our eggs in the same basket. We have to leave room for manoeuvring. So we believe that the increase of the salaries, especially of the lower salaries, must be an important part of the solution, but it shouldn't be the entire solution. It shouldn't feed into the inflationary pressures. So we believe the increase of the wage is in the right direction. We might not have agreed on the percentage, but it was something that had to be done. But we need to add more tools to our toolkit. The second is what the Prime Minister said, the subsidy of the cost of energy in various ways. And here the very large energy hikes has created a surplus from taxes which can be used in order to mitigate the pain, both for the weaker and also for the productive fabric, to the extent possible. And the third priority in our view, and I touched upon this in my speech, is the fact that we can still make steps in order to reduce the non-salary cost. This is something that we saw in the video also, and these are in fact the steps made. The non-wage costs in Greece is very high, and this makes young people leave the country, and we see that the businesses have to do things that are not legal, and the law-abiding companies are abided. So if we are able to mitigate that gap, we will be able to give more room for the employees and for the businesses. I know that we don't have a huge fiscal space, but we should be able to give them something. We should leave something for the second term in office. Yes, Mr. Papalexopoulos is right when he talks about the non-wage cost. Indeed. When and if we will create the fiscal space in combination with the other analyses that we have in order to give a sustainable future to our pension system and our social security system, we would attach great importance to reducing the non-wage cost. The steps that have been made are not negligible, and we have, in fact, reduced and done away with taxes such as the solidarity tax, which was, in fact, something that impacted quite significantly on the salaried persons and was something that was an impediment for working in Greece, because I have spoken with people who left Greece, not because they didn't have a job, but because the net salary after tax was, in fact, much lower than what they could find abroad. So we see in this international headhunting efforts that we have undertaken in order to reverse the brain drain, and I think we've got some positive things to show for it. We see the net income and the total impact for the businesses must play an important role. So in order to close this cycle, do you have, in fact, have a reaction with respect to how the huge cost of energy impacts the cost of production? Yes, we need subsidies for the productive fabric. Not only the small and medium-sized ones, but also the large ones are at a disadvantage internationally, because we're quite behind in countries in our effective organization of the energy market. A lot of our competitors that we, in fact, have to compete with internationally, they have a steady cost, and now we're trying to book the various jobs without knowing what the cost is. You can't depend on a cost not knowing where the final price will be. Yes, indeed, the price of energy in Greece has not been, in fact, following the same steps in terms of deregulation as the European market, which were a lot more mature. Saving the PPC from a certain bankruptcy was a great contribution to stability in the energy market for Greece. And, of course, in this deregulated market, we are able to have a strong national player that can support the consumers and businesses and farmers, as it did. And it continues to do throughout the crisis. But also it can invest in the long term and can give the possibility for these bilateral agreements. I believe this to be a significant success of the government and of the enterprise itself. But renewables, you mentioned it, this is one of the top priorities for Greece and the government in order to do away with those impediments that will stop the companies from using either net metering or producing their own energy as self-producers. And that means that you could, in fact, meet some of your energy needs with the cheapest form of energy, which is renewable as we speak, especially solar. We have identified the issues and problems, but it is one of our top priorities to overcome these, some of which are connected to the licensing and to enhance the mix of renewables in our energy balance overall. When you hear about delays in licensing, I want you to know that this is not only a Greek problem, it's a European one. There are many European countries where licensing is, in fact, more difficult. So that is why we are talking in the Council, and the direction of the European Commission is to have a European-wide legislative coverage that will permit us to simplify the process in terms of licensing RES at a national level also. And this is one of the manners that the President of the Republic knows very well, because at the time that she was in the court, she knew how important it was to facilitate this licensing, to find those areas which are called go-to areas by the Commission, where we'll be able to have more firepower in terms of renewables, together with the communities, the local communities, and the various compensatory measures that we must have in respect, especially with the wind turbines, because the wind turbines are those that truly impact on the landscape. But we need more renewables. We have to overcome these difficulties. And, in fact, tomorrow we have a meeting which is key, where we'll look at the issue related to siting for renewables. And I have a very specific opinion. Rather than have 3 or 4 wind turbines in various points of, or everywhere in Greece, we should have a set of large projects sited in specific areas which can truly increase our potential for generating energy from wind and solar. This was something that I wanted to broach later, but no problem. So, in those who don't know, there is the simple belief that, well, as this is easy, why don't we just go about it, and we will be able to solve things as we go about it. But, you know, even if we are going to cut the red tape, there will be still quite a few years' time. It'll be in quite a long time before we are able to have the renewables and the distribution. I'm certain that for 3 or 4 years, perhaps even more, we will have, in fact, a lot of difficulties to surmount in this issue. This is especially true for Greece, given its geographical location and being surrounded with the countries that it is. So we all agree that we want to expedite the renewables, and this would be a good thing. It's something that we all believe in. But let's not believe in and of itself that this in and of itself is sufficient to overcome the difficulties that we will be called upon to surmount. So let's close this chapter. You said it in your speech, and the Prime Minister talked about it. It is investments. I agree with what you said as an assumption, Ms. Sakellaropoulou, that at this moment in time, attract investments or the lack of investment plans is not Greece's problem. The fact is that these might be lost, or they might not be implemented ever. They might never be put into practice because there's a set of setbacks and problems. You enumerated quite a few of them. Now you have the Prime Minister before you, and this is a public discussion. It's an open debate. Imagine yourself as the person who actually had a genie before you, and you could ask 3 questions. If you had, or 3 wishes, In order to avert the risk that you mentioned, what would you like to do?
First of all, justice. And most investors, foreign and domestic, say that the number one thing they would like to see is a change in the justice system, faster award of justice. Now, education and state reform. Well, this has a long-term horizon. If I wanted something to happen that will give us short-term gains, I think it would be to encourage medium-sized companies and large companies that this country really needs. It's not that we don't need small companies. We need more medium-sized and large companies that can be more extroverted and that can invest more in HR and in innovation. So there is a will to move towards that direction, but we don't see this happening in the legislation. I think we've actually gone back instead of moving forward. And here we're talking about the PA. This allows to finance plans up to 30 million. With a cap we had was 10, and now it's gone down to 3 million. How will this allow us to create clusters which will be competitive at a global level? So you talked about justice. That's the number one issue. And secondly, you talked about large and medium-sized companies. We know that Greece has some good large companies that export, and we have a lot of micro enterprises, but not enough medium-sized enterprises. Medium-sized enterprises, which in the rest of the EU are the ones that are more creative, that invest more. They create an ecosystem around large enterprises. Now, the issue of the size of enterprises, this is something we've discussed a lot, both in the government, but also with society, and this is why we have a lot of tax incentives encouraging the merger of companies and the creation of larger scale companies. And you said that we need to increase the level. We have to have bigger companies, and I'd like to appeal to you. Let us try to reverse the traditional logic of Greek entrepreneurs who always wanted to have the final say and to have absolute control of their enterprise. So they look warily towards mergers and acquisitions and having new shareholders. They say it's better to have a small company and have more shares in that company. I think that's wrong. I think we need bigger companies and a lot of shareholders, not just one shareholder, provided they are robust. Now, justice, that's a huge chapter. A lot of interventions have already taken place, pilot trials, all these important interventions that will speed up the award of justice. But this is a huge battle, and this is a long-ranging, a wide-ranging reform, and I don't think it could be carried out in the space of 4 years. Now, if you ask me whether justice should be the focus of our attention and whether we should actually look at it more in our second term in office, I think that this is very important, and there are many outstanding issues that we have to address. And you see that there are a lot of small self-evident changes, like not allowing postponement of trials to go on indefinitely, because we had postponement after postponement, and this was very bad, and this would lead to huge delays. But even small changes actually create, they cause problems and an upset, and we know that it's important to carry out these reforms in the area of justice. They're very important, but one must also add that as a whole, when it comes to outstanding issues in relation to investments, and I'm talking more about the administrative justice in particular, I think that many changes have been made, many steps have been made, steps forward, and I think that the Supreme Court, it has shown understanding when it comes to these conflicting interests and the need to strike a balance, for example, between the need to have investments and, of course, the need to protect the environment. So let's not just say that nothing has happened in the area of justice. That's not good. It's wrong to say that, but I believe that one of the three main reform priorities when I present my vision for the next government, because I will present this in my pre-election program. So I'm not going to ask you about when the elections will be held. You can ask me later on. Let's move on to the next chapter of our discussion, which we've already touched upon. When I ask you what's changing in the economy, what's changing in the world, in this new geopolitical landscape following the war in Ukraine, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is what's changing in addressing climate change, green transition, and the cost of this green transition. So a short introduction, if you like, will be shown to us in the next video. Thank you. There is no doubt that green transition, both for the countries, for the enterprises and society, well, this is difficult, but we have no possibility to postpone it. We must proceed full steam ahead. Now we have the data, the technology, the policies, and we can implement this green transition. So the framework for green transition leads to an increased cost and obligations for the EU industry. This makes us feel that we are at disadvantage compared to non-EU industries, and of course which use EU as one of their main markets. One of the main problems we're called upon to face is carbon leakage. So then when we complete the green transition or on the way to green transition, we don't want to run out of industry, like running out of steam. So there must be a balance between green transition and economic activities in a big market such as the EU market. So the answer of Europe to climate change cannot be more duties that we try to impose on our partners. So in the aluminium, we know that there are measures that will not have a good impact on the effort to address climate change, and this is something that is admitted. So CBAM would increase the cost of production by 50% for aluminium production, and there is no duty on the borders that could offset this increase in production costs. Climate crisis and energy crisis, well, we cannot postpone green transition, and this can be reflected in the REPowerEU. So green transition for Greece requires speeding things up. We cannot decelerate putting the brake, for example, on decarbonification. We have to become independent from fossil fuel, and we know that the use of gas is used in electricity production, and there we have RES, renewables, that could be used as an alternative. But renewable sources must be properly sited in land and at sea, and they must be combined by carbon storage facilities so that we can save energy. Greece has one of the strictest regulations for siting of wind farms in Greece. Wind farms are investments that were licensed 10 years ago. This is a long period of time. So the EU directive on renewables forces the member states to have a licensing procedure which cannot be over 2 years. So this is a reform that Greece has to make. We have to simplify the licensing for wind farms. This doesn't mean that all applications will be approved. It's just that the country must decide within 2 years whether it can accept or reject an application for wind farms. These reactions to wind farms are asymmetric in relation to the true impact of wind farms, which are localized, if you like. So what the state needs to do is it needs to explain simply the benefits of wind power, not just to the consumers, but also to local communities. So everybody will be able to move in a concerted way and to achieve climate neutrality, which is our ultimate objective. As SEV, green transition and supporting the Greek industry, well, they are one of the things we want to achieve through our actions. So let me say that our efforts have 3 levels. The first level is any involvement in regulatory initiatives undertaken either at a national or EU level. So we try we don't try to halt or to stop the green transition. We want it to be realistic and feasible. So we are part of the solution. We're not a problem. And this is something that all decision-making centers need to understand, all regulatory bodies. So the second level now, that's at the level of the companies, where through a series of programs, training programs, or through synergies, through cooperation, or even transfer of know-how, we try to strengthen the efforts we make. And this effort is not just a demand for green transition from a regulatory point of view. We want to survive. So it's a matter of survival in the future, in the next 20, 30 years. And the third level, when we're not so good, is to train society, to make society aware that this transition comes at a cost. It has a price attached to it. And we must be ready to accept this cost in order for this green transition to be properly completed without leaving behind it a negative impact on the economy of Greece.
I believe that 3 questions come to mind. If, because of the economic crisis and the war in Ukraine, we have to water down our ambitions when it comes to the ambitions in order to have longer times for adjustment and lower goals. I don't agree with that, but that's something that exists as a question. And Mr. Papaaleksopoulos said that the European economy will have a disadvantage, in fact, for the next few years. And Greece will have a disadvantage within the European economy. What will we do about that? A third question, which follows on what was just said before. In this difficult period of time, how can we actually have change come about in order to have a more mature energy market, so that a business can, in fact, calculate what its energy cost will be next year when it's calculating the cost of production? Where shall we start from? Are we going to water down our ambition or not? You put a lot of issues. No, we won't water down our ambition when it comes to the Fit for 55 targets. But at the same time, we have to make certain that there is no magic button or a genie, as you said before, that will take us from where we are today and will take us to the world of renewables without going through a transitional stage. And we have had very difficult discussions at the level of the Council, and we need something that's going to be a transition. And natural gas in those countries that have nuclear are, in fact, very necessary to act as bridges in these transitional periods until we are able to have a great stake of renewables in our energy mix. It is true that renewables have a geopolitical nature now because they help us wean ourselves off the Russian natural gas. This won't happen overnight. Neither can we wean ourselves from natural gas overnight. So I believe that the capital markets did not read correctly the fact that this is a phase even though we might go through this fast, in this transitional period, we will need to wean ourselves off the fossil fuels. And what we're seeing now in the oil markets is, in fact, the result of the lack of investment in the discovery of oil, because nobody wanted to do it. So I think that we didn't actually measure the potential, the true dynamic of this transition properly. This is something that we've discussed at length with SEV, technical matters such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the manner in which we're going to create an equal playing field between the European businesses and those who import in Europe. I would like to say to SEV, because there are certain specificities in Greece with respect to the markets that we are exporting in, we will accept nothing that is going to put the Greek industry at a disadvantage compared to the other EU countries. And as the discussion matures, we are going to be ready to discuss this with you. Decarbonization and the reduction of emissions is something that has to be mapped and carefully. So how we're going to go to 55%, then 80%, and then to have climate neutrality. So how we generate energy, how we can reduce emissions, especially by weaning ourselves off lignite, industry, transportation, buildings, farming, and shipping is a special chapter for Greece, because 2.5% of global emissions is something that is a sector in which rather Greece has a stake in, because we are leaders in shipping. Interventions have to be made. And there are win-win interventions for that matter. Execonomo, the saving of energy at home, is something that's win-win. It, in fact, creates a lot of jobs for the domestic industry, because we see a lot of the structural materials, such as aluminium, are Greek, and we see that it also reduces the emissions as well as generating energy savings. So that means that it is of great value for us. I think we should go to those solutions that have proven themselves to be useful and we've used in the past. And there are other programs. You remember the equipment for the various devices that use too much energy. And we have the energy saving also at a level of home. And there's a matter of education and training. It's very important to have such savings. There's a lot of jobs that will generate from this line of work. This means that we might import the raw material, but we need to have a positive social footprint for Greece and a negative energy one. We hope to go to the society of knowledge, but I'll be brief in this. I also agree the crisis should not be an alibi in order to water down these ambitions in terms of the climate. But the data have changed. And as Kane said, when the data changes, I also change my mind. What do you do? There is a different geopolitical situation, and how we are going to go about things and negotiate has changed, and the cost of energy has changed. Now, at a European level, because Greece follows TAC there is an inertia, and we have to look not if, but when we're going to tackle this. And I see that this is something that is, in fact, known very well here from the Prime Minister, and we will be able to balance this difficult triangle, and it has the energy cost and competitiveness of the industry, and we are going to find ourselves doing a balancing act here. when you're talking about the need for protection or support in order to have businesses withstand this difficult period. What comes to mind? It was an unfortunate use of the term protection. I was talking about safeguarding a level playing field. We can, in fact, compete on basically an equal footing. Let's go to the last chapter now.
So I think that this is worth mentioning. We now realized that we didn't have a level playing field, particularly in relation to natural gas prices in Europe, and that certain countries had lower natural gas cost. But let's not go into this any further. Now, the last chapter of this discussion, which might have been under other conditions, the only subject of discussion is that Greek society, Greek economy needs to move and become a knowledge society. We're talking about linking digital transition to companies. Let's watch the video. Thank you. So, vocational training and guidance in northern European countries, which is the main lever for growth, well, it's for current jobs and future jobs. There's sufficient funding for that, and it's recognized by the market and society. So, in June of 2019, we launched an innovative 3-year program for brewers and for wine makers, and we had dual training, meaning we had a sandwich course, combination of theoretical knowledge and practical training in real-life conditions, because this training takes place in our factory. So the students get a salary, they get insurance, and they also get a certificate from a German institute which is recognized worldwide. So if you think that it's expensive to train people, employ amateurs and see what problems you'll encounter. I chose an industry for internship, and I didn't know if this was going to be useful. Now, some months later, I can certainly say that this one's one of the best choices I've made for my future. I worked with people who showed me what it means to belong in the workplace. I believe that internship should be for 6 months and not 2 months, in order for you to really understand whether the profession you have chosen is the one you really like. And I think that more bodies should participate in the program, because they stand to gain a lot. So in Greece, people have realized that universities and the companies need to work together. Knowledge transfer, helping innovation, and supporting entrepreneurship, particularly by young researchers. Well, now we have a good support framework and incentives for us to proceed. So the NTUA has a plan and a passion. We've worked together in the last 2 years with companies, the industry, and other universities and research centers. So we work with SEV, and we have specific objectives: networking, internship, supporting research, which is of interest to the industry, allowing students to learn more about the market and to carry out a digital leap forward, but also to be able to retain researchers and professionals in Greece. We're going through a period where use of technology covers everything. On the one hand, we have a need for people who know how to create software. We're talking about software engineers, but at the same time, everything, even when it comes to production, will need people who know how to use technology. We're talking about ads we see for people who know how to use computers, for example, because they will handle equipment. We, the startups, understand technology. We're flexible. We can experiment, create new services. But on the other hand, industries understand the needs and the procedures. So this is the Scale Up to SEV program. It interlinks large, mature Greek companies with new startups. And through this interconnection, this linkage, there is a win-win situation for all. So innovation is an important part of SEV's strategy. It's the way in which, as a country, we can have diversified products, high added value, and we can change the balance of exports. The important thing is that whereas Greece was out of this game for many years, in the last 5 years, this sector has become a locomotive. It was below 5 billion, and now we have over 8 billion. So this is something that continues to grow. So we're going from strength to strength. Now we as SEV do our utmost to support the 80 members we already have in this category with matchmaking, with innovative Greeks, where we have the Greeks of the diaspora, and we also have a toolkit, Innovation Ready, which helps these companies. So SEV is dedicated and it wants these companies to become 10% of the Greek GDP. Very nice video. I really liked it. And to have startups representing 10% of the Greek GDP. If we add up what we represent, we've already reached 150% of the GDP. It's an exaggeration. I've heard this being said many times. Something absurd happened during the pandemic. Digital reform and digital transition of the Greek state was faster than that of the companies. So the companies were lagging behind. They didn't modernize themselves fast enough, incorporating digital technologies in their production and in their day-to-day operation. How can you bridge this gap? The challenges facing the companies and the state are very different. So what the state did, this leap forward, and we're all very happy, is that it digitized existing procedures. In most Greek companies, this has happened many years ago. So this was a problem that we had 15 years ago. So what we need to do now is to think how AI can play an important role in how we can approach our clients in a different way over the internet. Well, this needs a change in mindset. And it's not something that can be done by a small group. This is an important reform that we need. And there we are lagging behind and we need to speed up. But these two things, we're not comparing like to like. We're comparing apples to pears. So the problem remains. Last question for you. Some steps have been made, and now we're talking about something that is considered controversial, but I see we're talking about higher education. So there are lots of reforms, for example, PhDs, internship, but paid internship, creating, helping students create startups. What do you think about all this, and how prepared are Greek companies to enter this arena? This is something we'll see in practice. We truly believe in this endeavor. We heard about some of the initiatives by SEV. There are many more. There's EVP, which for many years now has been training people. We have many cases of companies that are pioneers in this field. So we try to show these best practices and to help other companies follow suit. And as I mentioned earlier, we now have the framework for apprenticeship and for training of young people. And I accept the challenge that you have set indirectly, yet very clearly. We have to see how, on a mass scale, the Greek companies can take up this opportunity. And there, SEV will give a helping hand in order for us to achieve the best possible result. My question is the following. As mentioned before, and this is well known, the Greek economy, more than other EU companies, has an SME archipelago or an SME backbone. So we're talking about family businesses that find it hard to change their mindset and to take out loans and become digitally innovative and transform. They need help from outside, from the state, in order to create clusters, meaning what a small family business cannot do. If they get together and they can achieve economies of scale and make use of new tools, is this something you're thinking of doing? We've talked about this need before. We said that it's important for companies to have more possibilities to collaborate or even merge, and there we can have bigger companies when we have such mergers. But we've already given the opportunity to many enterprises to improve their digital skills by working with large technology companies, a very important digital training for SMEs in tourism. And this is a program that is of vital importance for these small companies to survive in today's harsh reality. And we know that the tourism sector is one of the pillars of the Greek economy. Yet we're talking now about digital skills. So this is one of the biggest challenges yet, if you like, for the Greek economy. And I'm talking about the next 5 years. Because right now, you know better than I do, we have an asymmetry in the labor market. We know that the market has other skills, the companies require other skills, and in order for us to bridge this gap, we have to intervene on many levels. First of all, on the level of training. We're talking about new recruits, and we also have a focus on vocational training. We have model vocational lyceums. This is something new. They work together with local society, and they develop a curriculum which is matched to the needs of the companies in a specific area. The bill for higher education is a revolution, and it's bad that we only have a discussion on the way in which universities are managed. This is something that only concerns 500 people. They may feel that they're losing access to being powerful in universities, but the system we are promoting is representative and it meets the needs of the universities. But let's look at industrial PhDs and the possibility for universities to create long-term learning centers. And then you can go to the university and have a special training program for your company employees, either as SEV, and we're talking about apprenticeship as well. We need your help there. We need your support. You have to give more opportunities. You have to open up more vacancies for apprentices and for internships, because we need these students to learn from you, and we need help from the companies, and we want you to commit yourselves and give us specific numbers, how many apprentices can be offered in various sectors. So there's a lot of interest. So we're trying to stop having these silos, because we had universities on the one hand, we had companies on the other side. We are ready as a society. And let me talk about the innovation ecosystem now. And let me agree with what was previously mentioned by Mr. Veremis, and let me share the optimism that he has. He is a person who knows a lot about this ecosystem, and this was before I entered politics. And what's happening is very impressive right now. And I'm not saying that we're just having companies that grow much faster, that produce innovation, that employ a lot of people with very good salaries. So we're talking about brain gain. We have people coming from abroad to work in Greece as well. A lot of problems are easily solved, and these companies work hand in hand with the state in order to help us formulate public policies. And something else, these innovative companies have a different way of perceiving things, and there's a different sense of ownership. So employment and ownership, well, these are closely intertwined as concepts in innovative companies. And I believe this model of employees who also own these companies, who participate in these companies because they have stock options or shares, company shares, this is something that this innovation ecosystem should try to spread to the rest of the enterprises in Greece. So we have many tax incentives for such initiatives, such tools. So please do not use it sparingly. Use it as much as you can. And I think that even innovative companies have a lot to learn from startups, from the way startups are organized, from the way in which they work, because there's this collective, if you like, spirit, this team spirit. And I think that this is a very flexible model and may offer, of course, better remuneration if the company is doing well, and greater job satisfaction and greater dignity. I really would like to stress the word dignity in the workplace. And dignity in the workplace is not something that is only linked to one's salary. It is something deeper, something more substantive. And it's important for peace in the labor market, but also in order for companies to make full use of their human capital. We fully agree that the way in which these startup companies work, not only when it comes to ownership, because of course you have a better legal framework, so listed companies can offer stock options more easily. So the ownership model gives you more freedom, more flexibility, but I think companies also have a lot to learn, more traditional from the new startups and also the state. So speed is of the essence. I feel very slow. I feel sluggish. There in startups, you have 1 month to find a solution, otherwise you move on. You can't keep insisting. That's wrong. And another thing I'd like to say is that sense of meritocracy, which is prevalent. And in the public sector, of course, but to a certain extent, even in the private sector, we don't have this level of meritocracy. So this is a new reality, a new reality where there's meritocracy. I think we all can gain a benefit from this. The problem is that every time I talk to them and ask them what the capitalization is, the number changes. 5 goes to 7, and then it goes to 8. And when I ask what's happening, the markets are going down now. Oh, I didn't know that. Anyway, so I know that they want to represent 10% of the GDP. That's 20 billion, right? I'm talking about 20 billion euro. And how many jobs and what type of innovation and what type of employees will actually help and will feed the economy in general? Well, we could talk for hours, but I've realized that time flies. Thank you very much for the discussion. I hope, Prime Minister, that you appreciate the fact that I didn't ask you about early elections. And if you decided to call early elections, what would the reason be? So there's the question.
I can tell you that this is the last General Assembly, which is happening before the national elections, which have been set for the springtime of 2023. You know, when I was talking before about an optimistic piece of news, the most optimistic one was the intervention today of the head of the British Museum, which for the first time in decades left, in fact, the possibility open for the unification of the Parthenon marbles. Thank you very much. I would like to give you a title if you would like to give your final points for a couple of minutes. I translate the motto that we're paving the way together. You're referring not only to businesses, you're referring to the public sector and society. Mr. Papakalexopoulos knows that in the world of the economy and the businesses, there's been a discussion that a large company does not only have a duty towards its shareholders, but also to its social milieu, not only shareholders, but the stakeholders, and that includes the social and the environmental. Now, could you tell me how you see this challenge, the social responsibility of the businesses in the broader sense, not only in the CSR level? What about the role of the businesses in order to reinforce the social cohesion And I would like to ask you, Prime Minister, in the same subject matter, what are you expecting, what are you seeking from businesses in order to reinforce social cohesion? In 1 minute. Well, permit me to go about it a bit differently. I think that there is, in fact, the trust barometer that is taking the pulse of society and seeing what society trusts. It's obvious internationally that there is, in fact, a great shaking of the trust of society in most of the institutions. So most of the trust has been shaken, rather. So this is also true for NGOs. And there is, in fact, a smaller reduction of trust vis-à-vis the businesses worldwide. But this also goes hand in hand with a broader perception of the society that I trust you, I place my trust in you, but I want something back. So we have to look at the mutual interest. So that means we've put social corporate responsibility behind us, which was, in fact, done by the corporate world when they'd actually exhausted everything else. But now we're looking at something that's more integrated. It's not what we can do for society. It's how businesses are, in fact, part of society, more and more so. And this actually takes businesses out of the zone of comfort that we're used to. But if we actually take this, in fact, forward, we all have to gain. So give more opportunities to women, embrace diversity, put into practice what you said through the possibility of using resources. There are a lot of untapped resources in your businesses. Put this into practice. We're doing this in public sector. We are creating meritocracy, and we have the employees as stakeholders. Don't look at corporate social responsibility as a formal responsibility, which is a publication that we print at the end of the year. I think that everybody, as far as their local footprint is concerned, can make a difference. Also, we should think how each and every one of us can make a difference that will give back to society, the society in which they operate. Thank you warmly, both of you. And I'd like to thank the audience for their forbearance.